What's up, guys? This is Mitch from Boardco. Today I'm going to be breaking down the differences between two of the most popular towboats on the market. Right here behind me I've got a Supreme S240 and an Axis T23. Now both of these are current model year, 2022 model year boats, and so they'll give you a really quick, clear snapshot of what you're going to be looking at between these two boats. So regardless of when you're watching this video and what you're absorbing, the information is correct as of the day that this is published, but if you're looking at future model years, that may not necessarily be the case. But you can typically get an idea of what to expect when you're looking at the difference between a Supreme and an Axis. Now, a few things to know before we jump into it. First off, there's a number of different Supreme models and a number of different Axis models. These boats are the most similar of the two models that we could put together with what we had available. The Supreme S240 is a little bit longer than the Axis T23. It's roughly the same size as the Axis A24 boat, but the T23 is not that far off. It's a 23-footer versus a 24-footer, but nothing that we're really talking about here is going to have to deal with the size of the boat. We're going to be breaking down all of the differences between them, particularly the differences that are going to be unique between each model and would be major differentiators when you're shopping between the two different boats. This can be applied to directly the Supreme S series and the Axis T series. This can also be applied to basically Supreme and Axis as a whole, since virtually everything we're going to be talking about is not model specific for each one of these boats. So first thing, let's jump into the hull design on each one of these boats. All right, so the very first thing to talk about here when I'm on the outside of the boats is the hull design of each boat. Now, when we're talking about hull design, we're not necessarily talking about the design on the sides of the boat, though that is a thing. And we're not even necessarily talking about like the depth or freeboard of the boat, which, as you can see, the Supreme is a taller, deeper boat than the Axis. What we're really talking about here is the running surface of the boat. In other words, if you take the chine, this side point of the boat right here, and go down from there, that is what we refer to as the running surface. It's the part that's always touching the water and that is the platform on which the boat sits as it's going through the water. Now, these two boats have fundamentally different hull designs to them, and there's advantages and disadvantages to each one. The Supreme features the EZ-V hull design. It's inspired and brought over from the Centurion Opti-V hull, which has become pretty legendary in the wakesurf industry. The Axis is based on the Wake Plus hull, which is an evolution of the Diamond hull, which is a hull that was designed initially back in, I believe, 2002, but don't quote me on the year there. I'm not 100% sure. But the idea behind it is it's an evolution on a flatter base hull that's designed primarily for water skiing that's been then adapted to be able to wakeboard and then in connection surf a little bit better. The EZ-V hull on the Supreme is designed primarily with a surf focus in mind, which is going to also wakeboard well and it's going to water ski decently as well. But the primary focus of the hull was designed from the bottom up to be a surf series hull. This hull is brand new for 2022. The Wake Plus hull is essentially the same hull that has existed for quite some time now, basically a decade. And so let's look at the differences between each one and what makes each one unique. Now, in looking at the two different hull designs, the most important thing to point out is a metric called dead rise. This is a measurement of the angle from the center line of the boat to the outside chine of the boat and how much angle that exists at the back of the boat, at the transom area of the boat. So dead rise at the transom. If you look at the very fronts of each one of the boats, they're not that different. But as that running surface moves towards the transom, the boats become very, very different. If you look at the back of each one, the Supreme over here has a 20-degree dead rise. Now that's the angle from right here in the center, right underneath the silent stinger plate, moving all the way up to the chine of the boat. It's this angle that sits there like this and basically how much V is in the bottom of the boat. On the Supreme EZ-V hull, it's a 20-degree dead rise hull, meaning that there's quite a bit of V in the bottom there because that's significantly higher degree of dead rise than what's available in most surf boats or wake boats that are out in the market. By contrast, if you look at the Axis hull, it does have a little bit of V to it, but we're talking about just a few degrees. I mean, probably a total of 5 or 6 degrees going across, meaning that the Supreme EZ-V hull has 3 times roughly as much V angle to the bottom of the boat at the transom. Now that V angle starts about mid-center line through the boat, about where the tower is where that V starts to really disappear on the axis and where it continues forward on the Supreme. Now, when we're talking about a V-style hull on the transom versus a flat-style hull on the transom, there's some advantages and disadvantages to each one. The advantages that sit for the V-hull design are the following. Number one, the boat will naturally sit deeper in the water. In other words, it drafts more total water. This Axis T23 has a total draft that is under 30 inches of water, where the Supreme S240 has a total draft of 36 inches, meaning that there's 7 or 8 inches of the boat that is further under the water before you put any people or ballast into the boat. The boat sits deeper overall under the water than it does on a flat bottom hull like the Axis. We'll get to more on that in just a minute. Next thing it does is the more V-taper that you have, the smoother it's going to drive through rougher water conditions. If you think of it this way, we can talk about the discussion of chopping wood as an example. If you're chopping wood with a sledgehammer, you got plenty of force and plenty of power coming down on the wood, but it's not going to split and break really easily. Even if it does split and break, it's going to create a lot of vibration that runs back through the handle of that sledgehammer that goes back into your arms and into your body. The same type of thing exists when you have a flat hull that is entering into waves and going against it. It's going to just slap and move and have that kind of a sensation as you're going through rougher water conditions. On the other side, when you have a V-shaped hull, it's like slicing through wood with an axe. The sharper the blade of the axe, the cleaner it's going to slice through the wood. And that same principle exists when you're talking about going through rough water conditions. So you're going to have a better handling, better maneuvering, and smoother ride going through rough water conditions with the deeper V-hull design on the Supreme. In contrast, when you're talking about the Axis, there is a benefit to the flatter hull design, particularly if you're in really smooth water. For handling in rough conditions, the Supreme is going to do better. In smoother water conditions, you'll be able to power slide or turn and spin around the back end of the Axis a little bit easier because it can slide through a turn. So if you're wanting to go and rip around power turns on a tube when it's smooth water out, the Axis is going to do that a little bit better than the Supreme will, because that V-hull has a tendency to want to track instead of slide. In contrast, when we're talking about at slow speeds for maneuvering, that V-hull that's going to track better is also going to allow for better low-speed handling. So as an example, if we're putting a boat onto the trailer, it's going to drive into the trailer a little bit smoother, and it's going to naturally settle into the middle of the trailer instead of having a tendency to wander or drift from side to side as you're coming into the dock, coming into a trailer or something else. Also, when you put a flat bottom boat on the trailer, it's kind of hard to get it centered and set because there's nothing that's keeping it in the center of the trailer, as opposed to a V-hull boat that does. Now, in talking about the performance on each of the boats, the Supreme is designed with a surf-focused hull. In fact, the V-hull design that exists in the Supreme was a result of designing the hull to be a better WakeSurf hull. If you think of it this way, the V-shape naturally will part water to one side of the boat or the other much cleaner and easier than if you have a flat hull design and you're trying to shift the entire flow of water to one side or to the other. This natural parting of the water leads to more water volume and a denser, more solid wave with more power when you're behind the boat. In contrast, a flatter hull shape is going to do a better job at producing a superior water ski wake because it doesn't displace as much water as a V-hull design. So when we're looking at it, the Axis will produce a better water ski wake at high speeds than something such as the Supreme. So the question is how much are you water skiing? And if it's a major component of what you're doing, the Axis might be a little bit better fit. Where if most of the time that you're spending behind the boat is wake surfing, the Supreme is going to do a better job and have a wave that is going to be more customizable and produce a longer, more powerful surf wave with less effort. The next thing to talk about is the wakeboard performance of the boats. As I mentioned, the Axis is designed with a flatter hull that will do better for skiing, the Supreme with a V-hull that will do better for surfing. But when we're talking about wakeboarding, it's a little bit more of a toss-up between the two boats. The advantage of running a flat hull design like the Axis has is the boat becomes slightly less weight sensitive. It's one of the reasons why on the EZ-V hull and on the Opti-V hull for Centurions that the engineers at Supreme designed a hull that has flat balance pads on the sides of the boat as opposed to being the entire boat running across. This allows the boat to be leveled out or made more sturdy when it's running across a level plane when you put a lot of weight in it or may have more weight on one side or the other side. The difference that you do have between these two boats for wakeboarding is as you approach the advanced and pro level wakeboard wakes that you may want to create behind this boat, if you have really advanced riders, the flatter hull design will be able to accept more weight into the boat before the wake starts to break down. That's just a natural result of the way that the hull design was engineered for wakeboarding and water skiing versus wake surfing. And that's something that you got to just look at between them. If you're going to be doing advanced level wakeboarding to a high degree behind the boat, the Axis may produce a better overall wakeboard experience than the Supreme. If you're going to do entry level wakeboarding, intermediate, or even into advanced level wakeboarding doing multiple flips and spins, the Supreme is going to do a great job. But if you're going to be dropping 720s and above, the Axis is going to do a superior job for a wakeboard wake. It just comes down to how much weight you're going to put in the boat. The last thing to discuss when it comes to the hull design and the differences between the two boats is fuel efficiency. Now, we've done a lot of videos talking about this in the past, including where we actually break down the fuel consumption on an Axis A22 and how it compared against the Centurion VI22, which basically has the same hull design as the Supreme that's sitting here next to me, as well as a lot of other different comparison things. There's a lot of factors into this besides just the running surface on the boat, but when you think about it this way, if your goal is to try and part water to one side or to the other side, and you have for when you're surfing, and you have a hull design that is going to do that naturally and effectively, versus a boat where you're forcing it to move from one side to the other side by putting out essentially a brake on one side of the boat, it's not hard to recognize as to why one will be more efficient than the other. There's a lot of other factors that we'll get into in the sec, such as the ballast placement, the way that the waves are created and shaped, and the different displacement technologies that are on each of these boats. But when it comes down to it, you're going to realize a 40% more fuel efficient boat in the Supreme versus the Axis. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of the pros and cons of each hull design on these boats, which is the most fundamental building block of what you're going to experience on each of these. This is going to be what delivers the performance that you're going to experience out on the water. Now, next thing I wanted to talk about is the surf systems between these two boats. This is something that gets a lot of discussion and fanfare. If you walk into any Malibu or Axis dealership or do a lot of searching and looking at marketing materials or forums online or whatever, there's going to be a lot of discussion about the breakdown between tabs or something like we have with the QuickSurf system on Supremes versus a gate system like we have with SurfGate here on the Axis. Now, let's first talk about what the two things are going to do similarly, and then we'll talk about the pros and cons to each one. As far as what they're going to do similarly, they're each designed to deflect water and move it from one side of the boat to the other side of the boat to make it so that you can have a surf wave on one side and then have it jump over to the other side really quickly. Now, for either one of these boats, doesn't matter which one, that's going to be able to be the case. They're each going to create a surf wave on the port side of the boat, and you can press a switch and it will move over onto the starboard side of the boat. You just press a button on the dash and boom, you've got a surf wave on one side, then a surf wave on the other side, and they will both do an equally good job deflecting water from one side to the other side. Now, once you get past that part, there are a few differences and areas that each one is going to have advantages versus disadvantages. First, let's talk about the advantages of the SurfGate system that is featured on the Axis. Really what we're talking about, the difference here, is the difference between a brake-style surf system, in other words, the one that moves directly out the side and crabs or yaws the boat down the water, versus one that the tab deflects downward on one side of the boat. The SurfGate system is that brake-style system that kicks out the side and is going to crab or maneuver the boat. Instead of it traveling in a straight line down the lake, it's going to travel in a line about like this, with the bow not necessarily facing the exact same direction that the boat is moving. This is going to clean up a wave on one side, create delayed convergence, and make it so that your wave is clean on one side of the boat. Now, there are some advantages to this system versus a tab style system such as we have with QuickSurf. Point number one is that that wave transfer is going to be able to achieve faster. So if you're wanting to jump from one side of the boat to the other, surfing on the port side to jumping over and surfing on the starboard side, that wave transfer can be achieved quicker on the Axis than it can on the Supreme. The tabs aren't moving any faster, or the gates aren't moving any faster, but the difference is you're talking about shifting the hull design from this to this, where on a Supreme, it's a little bit more of a roll component that is existing there that does take a slightly longer time period to achieve. Now we're talking about differences of like about half a second. It's not a huge difference between the two boats. But if you're going to do a bunch of wave transfers and it's a main component of your riding style, it's something that you may want to consider. The last component that is an advantage to the Surfgate system is the weight sensitivity of the boat. Because of the way that it kicks out to the side and it's relying more on a crabbing motion of the boat instead of a lean, if you have more weight on the off side of the boat, it is slightly less sensitive to that than it is on the Supreme with a V hull and with a tab style system. Now, there's things that can counteract each one of these advantages or disadvantages, but if you're just taking it out of the box right out the gates, if you engage a Surfgate system, the advantages you're going to see are going to be how quickly it can transfer from side to side, that you will need to have slightly less weight in the boat as compared to a conventional tab style system, and third, that boat is going to be slightly less weight sensitive, so if somebody moves from one side of the boat to the other, it's not going to impact the wave as much as a typical tab style system. Now, moving over to the advantages of a tab style system like QuickSurf versus a gate style system like Surfgate, we have the following. Number one, it's going to provide significantly less drag on the boat than a gate style system. This is one of those factors that leads into the increased fuel efficiency we talk about so much in regards to Centurion and Supreme. You're going to burn way less gas. It's also going to be less work on your engine, and it's going to be a quieter overall experience because you're going to be less RPMs that you're running to create the same style of surf wave. The second advantage to a tab style system is it's not just simply an on or off design like you have with a Surfgate. On Surfgate, it's on or off, left side, right side, or neither. In comparison, on the Supreme with the tab style system, it engages to different levels, which will change the shape and the dynamic of your surf wave on the fly. When you combine it with the center stinger plate, you can really change the orientation of the Supreme across a full three-dimensional axis, rolling the boat any direction you want, changing the flow of water off the back end of the boat in any way or direction that you want. This leads you to have a lot more customization over the shape and size of the surf wave. On something such as the Axis, the shape and the size of the wave are the same thing. You can make a wave that's bigger and steeper, or you can make a wave that's smaller and more mellow. But having a gigantic big wave that's really smooth and rounded is not something you can create out of the box with this boat. In comparison, on the Supreme, you can have a wave that is really big. I've surfed on ones that are shoulder high that are really smooth and rounded, and something that my 9-year-old could get out and surf on because it's not going to dump them over the top because it's smooth and rounded. That's something that you can change dynamically by adjusting the plates at the back end of the boat. The last thing to discuss here on the benefits of the QuickSurf system is that it's going to produce less bow rise and need less overall bow weight in the boat because of the way that the system works. The advantage, like I mentioned with the Surfgate system, is that you don't need to put quite as much weight in the boat, with the exception of you will need to add additional weight into the bow to make it so that you have bow visibility. On the other side, with the Supreme system, by engaging the plates, instead of having the bow or the back end of the boat drop way down deep into the water, it does it changes the angle of it slightly and pushes the bow down further into the water, so you have increased visibility. These are things that obviously you can counteract and change. If you put a ton of weight in the transom of the Supreme, stock ballast plus a bunch of people or steel weight or something like that, you can make it so you don't have great bow visibility. Same thing with the Axis. If you put another 1,000 pounds of weight in the bow of the boat, you can see over the bow clearly while you're sitting in the driver's seat and surfing. But if you're talking about out of the box, stock ballast, regular crew of people in the boat, the visibility that's coming out of the Supreme is substantially better than what you get out of the Axis. Some of that comes down to the surf system, some of it comes down to ballast placement, some of it comes down to hull design. but it's going to be one of the major components and factors. Now, the final thing I wanted to discuss here is the difference between a QuickSurf system on the Supremes versus any other tab style system that you see on other boats such as Taigas, MBs, Supras, etc. Now, the difference that you have is that the Supreme QuickSurf system was designed specifically to work with the V hull shape that exists in the Easy V hull on the Supremes. If it was running a flat bottom hull, all of the things that I just mentioned previously, and that you're fighting against ballast you're putting in the boat, it's going to be more weight sensitive, all of these other different factors would all apply to the Supreme if it was running a flat hull such as the Axis is. But because the point of the entire objective of splitting water from one side to the other is primarily achieved by the hull design on the Supremes, the QuickSurf system is not engaging or grabbing nearly as much water as it is on other systems. The lift that's created on the back end is dramatically less than what exists on other surf boats. Also, the amount of grabbing or hanging or control that needs to exist is not nearly as much on a Supreme as it is on other boats because the hull itself is doing all of the heavy lifting. As I mentioned previously in the hull design section, the hull on a Supreme sits 8 to 9 inches deeper in the water than an Axis before you put any weight in the boat. What that means is, though, yes, there is a little bit of lift that is being created by the plates at the rear, that lift is not even getting to the point of achieving the same thing that the draft is achieving by having a V hull. In other words, the Supreme will sit deeper in the water overall than the Axis will because it started off deeper in the water in the first place, and you're not lifting the entire thing out of the water, you're just creating a slight amount of deflection. If we ran a flat hull shape, that would be an entirely different story, but on Supremes, it's not. Now, that hopefully gives you an idea of the breakdown between the different surf performance parts on the boat. So let's jump on the inside and break down what you can expect on the interior of the boat. All right, there's a lot of stuff to talk about when we're talking about the comparison of the different boats as far as the quality of the components and materials. Now, we did a separate video that I got a link to here in the description as well as here at the end of the video that breaks down the fit and finish differences between a Supreme, an Axis, and a Centurion to show you the caliber of good, better, and best when we're talking about wake surf boats. So I'm not going to dive into it too deep because there's a whole giant video and we don't want to make this thing an hour long. But there's a few things to break down, and I'm just going to talk about the pros and cons as to each one with what you can expect as far as the interior design and fit and finish aspects of each boat. The first thing to talk about as far as the advantages to the Axis. As we mentioned previously and talked about the ballast distribution throughout the boats, 80% of the total ballast is sitting in the rear of the boats on the Axis, which means that through the center line of the boat, basically from the back seat up to the bow, there's virtually zero ballast in the boat at all. There's a center tank in some of the Malibu and Axis boats, but it's down under the floor, similar to what it is in the Supremes, but there's no ballast sitting underneath any of the side storage compartments at all. So the main advantage you end up running into at the Axis is you have more overall storage space that exists on the interior of the boat under the side seats on the interior. If you compare that over to the Supreme, the difference that you end up having is the ballast does take up a little bit more space under the side seats, so there isn't quite as much storage space. Now, because the ballast distribution is a little bit different in the Supreme versus the Axis, and because, as you can tell between the two boats, the Supreme is a noticeably taller and deeper boat, you have a similar total amount of storage between the two boats, but it's distributed a little bit differently in the Supreme than it is to the Axis. This comes down to the design philosophy between the two boats. The first thing to point out is the Supreme has significantly more ballast in the bow and through the center section of the boat, but because of the way that it's organized and laid out, there is significantly more storage in the bow, and there is more storage underneath the observer locker of the boat. Part of the reason for that is because in the Supremes, they decided not to move the batteries from the storage locker to the bow of the boat, primarily over concerns that if you were to take water over the front of the boat, you don't want your batteries sitting in a swimming pool, which may or may not be an issue that has been dealt with a lot by certain manufacturers. But On the other side of it, Supreme opted to leave them in the main storage locker, but they continue that storage all the way up through the bow of the boat, meaning it doesn't hit a bulkhead that runs through into the bow, meaning things such as water skis, wakeboards, surfboards, all of those different things can easily fit in the main observer locker in the Supremes. In addition to that, you have more storage space in the bow and more total overall room, as well as the ability to take out a center cushion, and instead of having your batteries there, you can have leg room if you wanted to take it out and put your feet down on the floor. Those are both advantages and disadvantages, just depending on how you want your boat laid out and what is important for you in how you're going to be setting it up and driving it. Now, when you're looking at these two cushions, you have the Supreme cushion here on this side and the Axis cushion sitting over here on this side. Now, the difference between them is fairly obvious just by looking at them. The Supreme cushion is significantly thicker than the Axis is. Going beyond that, if you notice and look, the seams are a little bit different in the Supreme versus the Axis, in that it's a triple stitch going all the way around that you can really easily see, versus the Axis that's a single stitch running here and then loops around on the sides of this cushion. The difference between them is fundamentally just a difference in how the boat is put together and constructed. In a Supreme, there is significantly higher end materials and processes put in place when they're constructing and building the boat. The seats are thicker, they're more plush. The vinyl is significantly thicker and more robust. The top coat to the vinyl and the backing of it is nearly 3 times as thick as the top coat of the vinyl for the Axis. It's something you can just simply pinch and feel how thick and robust it is versus how thin it is over here on this side. The difference between the two is just one is going to last significantly longer over time and is a much higher quality piece than the other one. And it just comes down to if that's an important factor for you when you're looking at buying a boat. If it's not really a big deal for you and you're planning on keeping your boat for 1 year and then changing it out, this is not going to be bad and probably won't fall apart after year 1. If you're potentially going to keep your boat for a longer period of time and want it to hold up better, this is going to be a better pick. It's constructed better and it's got higher quality materials. In addition to that, it's also very apparent if you pick up each cushion. The cushions in the Supreme are nearly double the weight that they are in the Axis, and that's just due to the higher grade materials that they're putting in, as well as the multiple layers of density in the foam and just how thick and robust the vinyl is. It's just a pretty apparent, quick, easy thing to look at. The next thing to look at is the components that are used throughout the boat. In the Supreme, there's a lot of billet aluminum and stainless steel components running all throughout. Things such as the drain vents, the windshield brackets and frames, all of the different components running throughout the inside, even things down to the cup holders. In the Supreme, they're either billet aluminum or stainless steel. In the Axis, they're plastic. And it just comes down to if those components are something that you're going to want to have as a higher end piece in your boat. So when you're looking at it between the interiors, the fit and finish, the way the boat is constructed and built, there's going to be quite a few more advantages to the Supreme than there is to the Axis. There are a couple things that the Axis is a little bit better at, but most of them end up going the direction of the Supreme. The last thing we wanted to talk about here is the towers between the two boats and the differences between them. Here in the Axis, there's a couple advantages of this tower versus the towers that are run on the Supremes. The first one being that the Axis tower can support 4 board racks. So a total of 2 sets of racks, an upper set and a lower set, if you needed to have more board storage space in your tower. That's something, because of the way that it folds and articulates, is not available in the Supreme. The second thing to talk about as far as the advantage of the Axis tower is it does fold down a little bit lower than the placement on the Supreme. Because of the way that they designed the folding assist on the Supreme and of the articulation of the tower itself, it does stick up just a tad bit higher than what you experience on the Axis. Now, moving over to the advantages on the Supreme tower, there's a few things that we can talk about with the Axis before we jump over to that. The first one is that the Bimini coverage on the Supreme is significantly larger. As you can see here, the Axis Bimini basically comes back to right here and then moves forward and covers basically up towards the windshield, leaving about half of the interior space in this Axis T23 exposed to the sun, as well as not a ton of coverage coming from the front. The last thing to show you here in the Axis before we jump over to the Supreme is the tower speaker integration, if you have tower speakers on your boat. As you can see here on the Axis, it is a clamp style system that goes in here to the tower that is a separate integration that isn't quite as clean. When we jump over to the Supreme, I'll show you how the tower speakers integrate into the bracketing in the Supreme tower. That pretty much covers it. The last thing I'll mention is just the racks here. These are bungee board racks. They are also available on the Supreme boats. The other option that you can option this Axis with is the clamping style board racks that clamp and sandwich your board down like this, which is also available on the Supremes, but there is one other board rack on the Supremes that we'll show you in just 1 second. So let's jump over to the Supreme, check out the advantages of that tower as compared to this one. All right, now that we're over in the Supreme, you can check and see the difference in the tower on the Supreme versus the Axis. As you can see, the construction is significantly more robust. It's just a bigger, heavier duty tower, which is going to be more sturdy and not going to rattle or shake as much as you're driving down the lake, particularly in rough water conditions. That's partially a result of the tower, partially a result of the hull has way less flex to it because of the hull design on the Supremes as compared to the Axis. As I mentioned before, we have different board racks that are available on the Supremes. The vast majority of them that we deal with have the bombshell board racks, which are like this. They're a clamping style rack that you can swivel like this, slide your board in, grab this, move it and open it up like this, and it will grab and sandwich your board in like this right here. This keeps your boards from sliding out. It also makes it so you can put really high-end surf style boards that are really fragile. They can still go in this rack and it's typically not going to damage them or cause any problems or issues just because of the way it holds them against some nice cushy material instead of against, you know, some hard plastic or something like that. So normally you can't put higher end EPS surfboards in either clamping racks or bungee racks like you saw on the Axis. So that is a nice feature. In addition to that, this tower also features tower panel inserts that are optional that you can put in that will bring in and match the outside of the boat. In this case, we've got a black tower with gunmetal metal flake inserts. These are actually gel-coated fiberglass, the same thing as the whole design of the boat, so it's a perfect match. It's not a attempted gel coat match, nor is it something that's going to fade or change color over time because it actually is fiberglass just like the hull of the boat. So it's going to match and just bring an extra element into it. It's on the outside and on the inside of the tower. In addition to that, there's full weight assist. I can drop this tower down in about 10 seconds. You just pop a tool in the side, do a 3/4 turn. It's got a cam lock activation that opens up, and the tower can move up and down. It just takes one arm for me to move it up and down, no problem at all, as opposed to the tower on the Axis, which I can do without a huge amount of effort, but it's certainly a lot easier with 2 people to be able to put those supports back in and things of that nature once you're putting it back up. Next 2 things I want to talk about were items that we discussed when I was over in the Axis. First off is Bimini coverage. As you can see, we've got the So Long double extra large Bimini on this guy that covers from this section of the boat, basically everything except the very, very back seat, all the way up coverage-wise to the very front of the windshield. So this is going to cover about 80% of the interior cockpit area of the S240. You do have extension arms that can come off the back that do not need supports and that you can surf with if you want to have the entire interior covered in shade. But it's going to just be a really robust, strong Bimini that's going to hold up really well and give you tons of shade coverage. You also have surf or heat-resistant surf pockets up in the Bimini for holding surfboards. As opposed to just straps that you have in the Axis if you're wanting to strap surfboards in there. This one has full integrated pockets that are a little bit nicer. The last thing is the integrated speaker system. As you can see, this ties into brackets that are built into the tower. It's just a lot cleaner, smoother, nicer look that is reminiscent on what you see on higher end boats such as the Malibu series, which is the sister company to Axis, or the Centurion boats, which is the sister company to Supreme. They're going to feature some of that as well. So in the Supremes, you have a lot of those elements that are the higher end elements that you see coming over from the Centurion lineup over into the Supreme series, rather than trying to water down a lot of those features and elements to bring the price tag down. Instead, they decided to incorporate them and use other efficiencies and practices to bring the price tag down on the Supreme boats. All right, that should wrap it up for the differences that are the core elements between the Supreme and the Axis boats that you see behind me. And this will hopefully be a good litmus test for what you can expect when you're checking out a Supreme and an Axis in general, regardless of what model or regardless of where you're checking them out. We try to be as objective with these reviews as we possibly can, though we understand and recognize that we are biased, and I do run a Centurion and Supreme dealership and have a full financial incentive for you to like the Supreme boat more. But with that being said, we want to provide as accurate information as we possibly can and to try and showcase the pros and cons to each boat and why each one will be better in one way or another, because with almost everything that you add a benefit to, there is also a negative takeaway. Last thing that I want to point out here, which is something that many people may be wondering or asking, it can vary depending on where you're located and depending on what's going on, but here where we are located, these two boats are roughly the same, have roughly the same price tag on them when you walk into a dealership to look at buying one. I can't guarantee that's the way that it is in your area, but when you're comparing the costs and the benefits to each one of these different models, know that I'm not comparing two boats that are radically different price tags or one that is way more expensive than the other. They're really similar overall in price. So we hope this information has been really helpful. If there's other ideas for videos you'd like us to make, please leave a comment below and we're more than happy to get to it. Subscribe to our channel on YouTube to get more information like this coming to you. And please reach out to us with any questions you may have or if there's anything we can do to help you out at all. Thanks a ton. Check out boardco.com for more information and we'll see you later.